my bald head. So, our theme, our question that we were asking that drew you here is one that I want to start off with and have a little bit of an opening statement from each one of our panelists. Is the Constitution hanging by a thread, or is it a rope, or what is it that is holding it? Or maybe there's nothing holding it together at all. Give us your assessment right now of how much of the Constitution is still being honored today in Congress, in the United States, in the judiciary, and the executive. Okay? Shane, you want to start?
Yeah, absolutely. So,
short answers.
Short? How is a lawyer supposed to do a short answer?
Couple of minutes.
Come on, Mark.
Okay. We'll follow up afterwards.
Thank you. She's the boss. All right. Yeah, there are big. It goes without being said that there are big problems that is indeed hanging by a thread. At least insofar as the definition comes from the founders. When you look at the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson tells us specifically what is deemed legitimate government. There are two components. Number one, he says that legitimate government is that which is designed to secure the rights of the people. And number two is put together by the people. That is, the people get to decide how they will be governed. So insofar as those two principles are legitimate, and I believe they are, that's what makes America so unique. The Constitution is failing to a large degree. It's not so much that the Constitution is failing as it is that we're electing individuals that don't understand the principles and are not willing to represent and defend those very ideas. So I believe that the principles are being undermined, that of separation of power, that of division of authority, the enumeration of rights are being rejected, the principles of popular sovereignty are being outright rejected, where you have 535 individuals, for example, telling 360 million people how to live. When you arrive at that point, it's difficult to say that the ruling document is being adhered to. But I do agree with Cleon, and I was so thankful that you brought this up, Mark. I'm an optimist, like almost to a fault, where I believe liberty is a God thing, agency is a God thing. It's something that we fought for before we came to this earth. That's a belief that I have. And as a result of that, that's the battle that's going on today. And I know that liberty and agency wins in the end, because that's the plan. And it's just up to us to engage at a high level once again to be able to restore these principles. And as we do so, I believe God is prepared to rain down on miracles, just as he did 200 and some odd years ago. I believe he's ready to work through us to restore these very ideas.
All right. A lot of experience in this area.
Thank you, Mark. Well, I tell you, there's no question in my mind that the Constitution is being violated in so many ways. But the concept of hanging by a thread, and we say this in our seminars, as far as I'm concerned, that thread is the privilege we have to vote. And as I remind students, do you know what we could do every 2 years if we really wanted to? We could change every member of nearly every state legislature in this nation, every 2 years. We could change the whole House of Representatives in 2 years, every 2 years. 1/3 the Senate. And every other 2 year period, we could do it all again. Another third of the Senate, the President. I mean, this is incredible. This is the founder's answer. Cleon always said, this is called peaceful self-repair. You don't need to riot and cause all kinds of havoc. You just need to express yourself every 2 years at the ballot box. Peaceful self-repair. Of course, that requires an educated electorate, which is one of the principles the founder said. You must have an educated electorate in order to keep your republic. So that's why we teach all these seminars, trying to help people understand these very simple principles. Another reason I believe that even though the Constitution is hanging by a thread, as someone mentioned, Cleon's always said he's read the last chapter in the book, and we win. Well, we also have the prophecies. This nation will endure. Of all the nations that have ever happened in this world, this nation will not fall. This nation will endure. I don't know exactly how all that's going to come about, but I know this is a day of miracles, and so we do our best. We encourage people, we try to help people understand principles, and somehow it's going to work out if we do our part.
Earl, Jenny just mentioned, one of my libertarian friends, and there's quite a few of them saying, oh, don't vote, it just encourages them. And my answer to that is always, well, imagine if you couldn't vote. How do you get rid of them? You know, where there's the cartridge box. You know, there's this old story about the various ways that you can fight. And the answer is, if you can't vote, a lot of times it ends in violence. That's the only way you can get rid of the bums, so to speak. So having that ability to change the electorate through proper education, which is what your Center for Constitutional Studies is all about, and the Academy here, it's just an important view. And Leonard Reed, who was the founder of FEE, the Foundation of Economic Education, he wrote a little booklet, or a little pamphlet one time, a little essay, and it said, one by one. Not one by one, but W-O-N by one. And that's really what it's all about, is one by one changing people's minds.
Don't you think the founders wished they could have gotten rid of King George at the ballot box?
That's a very good point.
But see, they didn't have that system.
Because of it. Yeah,
We do. We have that system they gave us.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. Joanne?
That is his son. Yes, so on a very micro level, to me, what I see every day as a teacher on college campuses is that the Bill of Rights is hanging by a thread, and particularly the freedom of speech. I find that students no longer understand the value of freedom of speech. They think that people need to be canceled for saying the wrong things. They don't understand that there really should be no such thing as hate speech, because it doesn't matter whether you like what someone says or not. It's very, very difficult for them to understand that concept, that slavery could only be ended because people had the right to speak out against a bad law. Women got the right to vote because they had the right to speak out against a bad law. Gay rights came about because you could speak out against a bad law. Without that right to free speech, we are doomed. And unfortunately, they don't understand that today, and they're afraid to speak out. And that's why I was so devastated by the loss of Charlie Kirk, because he was bringing back not just free speech, but supported speech. Not just having an opinion, but supporting that opinion with evidence, with facts, not just, it's my opinion and I'm entitled to it, but why do you think that? And how are you going to persuade me? How are you going to convince me? Mark and I have written a pamphlet called Persuasion versus Force. We believe that the triumph of persuasion over force is the evidence of a civilized society. We need to be able to do that. So I think we have to really protect free speech. The First Amendment is so powerful and so important, and that is starting to hang by a thread. Congressman Bitt?
Thank you. In the place that I work most of the time, we have tried to change the personnel, and that didn't work. And so we changed the infrastructure from the internal side. That didn't work either. And so I am convinced that while we're hanging by a thread in our Constitution, the very institutions that were created by the Constitution, the powers that were delegated by the states and individuals to the federal government, have now exceeded their bounds. And that is what's hanging by a thread, is the institutions created by the Constitution and the limitations. They are now being overwhelmed, totally overwhelmed. And if we don't take our institutions back, we will suffer. The scriptures are really clear about that. They're very clear about that. And so, I guess the point I would make to you is the government, the federal government, is not hanging by a balance, by a thread, except for in one thing, and that is overspent its money, and it's on the edge of collapse. There's two things that will cause us, in my opinion, to be preserved as a nation. First of all, repentance would be one. That would be a big one if we all repented of our sins and our national sins. But moreover, if we don't stand up and take back the institutions and take back the spending, that's why the states are so doggone important. That's why you need good leaders in the states to tell the federal government no. No, because I'm just telling you, when President Trump describes the swamp, he said at the end of his first term, he said, it turns out the swamp is deeper and broader than I ever thought. It is. It really is. That's why changing the personnel didn't work. That's why changing the infrastructure doesn't work. The only thing that will work is the hearts and minds of the people who change the institutions and get them to elect knowingly. They think they're electing people knowingly. Just watch some of the interviews of the man on the street in New York City. That will bring you down. So do it when you're in a good mood and withstand it, because we win. I just don't want to suffer the pain that I see coming if we don't take the proper steps.
Photo of the panel. I don't know if you guys did or not. Okay, thanks. So let's be a little more controversial here. Benjamin Franklin, at the end of the Constitutional Convention, was asked by a young woman, "What kind of government do we have, Dr. Franklin?" To which he said, "A republic if you can keep it." And later he wrote a letter warning that someday his greatest fear is that a monarchy would return to America and we would be ruled by a king. Now, he didn't fill in the blank how that would happen, but to what extent are presidents, including our current president, violating the Constitution by adopting a king-like executive order strategy to get through his own legislation? To what extent is this unconstitutional?
I'll jump in. It certainly is unconstitutional. When you look at executive orders, there's two types of executive orders. One is constitutional, one is not. The executive order that is constitutional are things that have been delegated to the president, where he's carrying out that constitutional function. What we're seeing right now, though, through scores of administration, almost from the beginning of time that this country was established, is a president bypassing the law-making function and passing their own laws, if you will. Right? You all probably remember, 10, 15 years ago, a president at the State of the Union said, "Hey, I've got a pen and a phone, and I'll bypass Congress if I need to." Right? Those are things that have become the status quo. And I believe to dig deeper here, it really comes back to something that Frederick Bastiat outlines in the book, The Law. And if you haven't read the law, I strongly encourage it. Right? I think it was written in the 1850s.
Right.
And what he says is this. He says, the moment that the electorate understand that they can get their politician to raid the public treasury for their benefit, say goodbye to your liberty. And now you have individuals it's not just the presidents, all levels of government that recognize that offering free stuff to the constituents will keep them in power. So, yeah, there are all kinds of unconstitutional things going on with regard to executive orders. What's the solution? The Americans have to fall in love with liberty all over again. I think Walter Williams, the famed economist, said, Americans have to fall in love with liberty all over again, understanding that its essential ingredient is limited government. So it's a desire to have more freedom as opposed to free stuff land on your table that jeopardizes freedom. So yeah, we've got big problems on our hands, and again, I think a big part of the solution is Americans understanding how profound this experiment is and fall in love with those ideas.
Let me ask Congressman Biggs first, and then get your other comments. As a sitting congressman, do you agree with Senator Rand Paul that President Trump has exceeded his authority, where Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution clearly states that it's Congress's duty to impose tariffs and not the president. Is he right about that? What's your view regarding this major debate where the president has, many people think, he exceeded his authority in single-handedly imposing tariffs?
Yeah, so I'm going to begin by saying we're a republic, not a democracy. We're meant to be a federal government, not a national government. We've become a national democracy. That, unfortunately, is where we sit. When we start talking, you talking specifically about tariffs, President Trump has issued about 235 EOs. Most of those EOs are direct ceding or delegation that Congress has made in one misguided way or another. And that goes back, you really saw that taking hold in the Reconstruction era, post-Civil War. You saw it really go forward when Teddy Roosevelt said, if it's not written in the Constitution prohibiting me from doing anything, I can do anything I want. You saw it go forward with FDR. You saw it going forward with LBJ, Richard Nixon. A lot of this took place. The original executive orders were meant to order things like stationery for a certain department and whatnot. And now what you have, though, is Congress refuses to take and hold its mandate and its authority. And so they will delegate to the executive branch almost limitless powers. And that is the unfortunate position that we're in. So we say we're hanging by a thread, getting back to that question. We are hanging by a thread, and not the least of which is the branch of government deemed to be the most powerful has ceded its authority to the executive branch and the judiciary. I've heard people say specifically that they will draft legislation so that the executive branch can interpret it and the judiciary can interpret it. That is a dereliction of duty to me. And on tariffs specifically now, that authority, like it or not, has floated over to the executive branch from a very laconic Congress.
Kind of like declarations of war.
Well, yeah, I mean, so that's why I started the War Powers Caucus, because you have to take that back.
Yeah.
And I've been very frustrated because we only have like 10 people in it, and it's a bipartisan, you have to bring someone from the opposing party. So the people that have come in from the other side are basically communists, and then you have the uber right-wing libertarian side on our side that are in there. So it is a problem that needs to be untangled, but it is all because, in my opinion, people have come into Congress without understanding the role of Congress vis-a-vis the separation of powers.
Any other two want to comment?
I'd like to comment about executive orders. You know, there are proper, as has been said, executive orders. The president is the CEO of the executive branch. He can tell the people in the executive branch what to do. He can give them orders. That's very appropriate. But when the president issues orders that actually makes law, telling people, you and me, what to do, how to do it, where to live, where to go to school, and all this kind of stuff, that's lawmaking, and that's not in the purview of the original intent of the executive order. I haven't kept an exact list, but I would almost say that what President Trump has done with most executive orders is to try to repeal unconstitutional executive orders. They didn't complain about that when those things were first done, creating law. Now when President Trump is trying to reverse that, they call it unconstitutional. I don't quite understand that. I think most of his action is to repeal that.
Okay, final question. And and we'll limit you to 2 amendments to the Constitution that you think need to pass because the Constitution isn't perfect and requires some change that you think would make us better or more constitutional. Joanne, you want to start?
Okay, so the amendment that I would like to have passed tomorrow is term limits. Term limits for Congress, for senators, and presidents. That would make such a difference. We would no longer have Congress people going in with $184,000 salary and coming out with $80 million in their bank accounts. You aren't getting any of that, are you? I know. It's not happening for you because you're too honest. The other thing isn't an amendment, but this is my personal, just a personal thing for me. I want restored to our students their right to bankruptcy. When they lost the right to bankruptcy, it became
For student loans.
for student loans. For student loans. It's in the Constitution, our right to bankruptcy, but students are not allowed to exercise that right. They're 18 years old when they go to college, and their counselor tells them, guess what? You got $30,000 in financial aid. And they're all excited because aid, they thought, meant help. When you aid someone, you help them. No. Aid means debt. And these poor kids, and I know because I've been teaching college for 30 years, they don't understand what that means to them. And then they're not allowed to bankrupt out of it. And so they're stuck with this. We have people now who are retired and not being able to get their Social Security because everything is being taken away to pay their student debts. And I think that colleges and banks need to be held responsible for what they've done. And I've watched tuition double and double and double again because there's no lid on it. And these young people who are now middle-aged, they need to be able to get out from under that debt. So I would really like to see them get that back.
Okay. Anybody else want to suggest anything? Earl?
I would, if I could just comment on term limits. You know, the founders talked about term limits in the convention, and they rejected it. And there's some reasons that they did. Term limits seem to be a Band-Aid on a boiler. They don't really solve issues. Term limits requiring people to constantly be changed really emphasizes or brings more temptation for the staff to make decisions and the staff to do things. Let me tell you, you're brand new. Let me tell you how it's done here. And so the best term limit is the ballot box. Every 3 years. That's the best thing. But if I were to say 2 amendments that I would suggest, number 1 is to repeal the 17th Amendment. Direct election of senators.
Oh, okay. I thought it was the income tax. That's 60.
Well, that was my next point, Mark. Repeal the 16th Amendment. And I'm glad Joanne made the comment that those terrible things that happened in 1913, there's one shining star, as she said, and that's Cleon was born on January 20th, 1913. Anyway.
Okay. Yes. Okay. Shane, do you have any other?
Yeah, well, he stole, the 17th Amendment, I'm right on board with that. I also agree with Thomas Jefferson. He said one of the few provisions he would have changed would have been found in Article 1, Section 8, the ability for the government to borrow money without restriction. And we see what's happening, and we're just getting hammered. Inflation is hammering us, just the printing of money out of thin air. And you see up until 1930, actually up until the early 1970s, before we was taken off the gold standard, right? Inflation was minimal. We went into the Civil War. We went into World War I, and we saw a slight increase in inflation, but that was those things were immediately paid back. So it had very small impact. But today, when you can print money out of thin air, say goodbye to your freedom. So I would do something with regard to Article 1, Section 8, and the borrowing of money. There's also some things I would do with the judiciary. Congressman Biggs, you mentioned that. But let me just put another one that is constantly under attack, and it's an amendment that's already in place, and it's the Second Amendment. I think that the founders were here today. they would change some of the language because apparently we're not smart enough to understand the language of the Second Amendment. So instead of a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, let's get rid of what's apparently creating all kinds of confusion and just say what the founders ultimately meant. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Period. End of story. So there's no confusion on what they're ultimately defending. So let's get out of the address.
All right, Congressman Biggs, do you have a couple?
Yeah, oh boy, do I. And by the way, I'll refer you to my book, which is being reprinted right now, The Con of the Con, so you might want to check that out. Hopefully in time for Christmas, or better. Anyway, the first thing is, I would combine into one amendment since I only get two. The repeal of the 16th and 17th, like Earl and Shane. Those two things, and actually John said this, if you got rid of those two things, we'd actually right the ship within about 6 months. And I believe that to be true. The other thing is, can I comment about tuition and how it increases? It increases because these student loans are federally insured. The federal government needs to get itself out of there. We can't afford to do that. Because there's a steady pot of money, that's right there, but it's not the amendment I want to do. I bring it up. The next one is to repeal the Federal Reserve. You cannot allow a private entity, ungovernable, to regulate your money, because to do so leads you to $38 trillion in national debt, which by my calculation, my estimation, will be within the next 10 years, if nothing is done, and I'm not forecasting much to be done, it'll be about $76 trillion. And that's where you'll be sitting, and so we have got to take control of that. We got to get getting rid of the Federal Reserve, and let quite frankly, the free market determine the money. Because when that happens, and if you back it with gold, man, this country would soar. It would soar economically, and the Federal Reserve is happy to have a small, modest amount of inflation, and they want to control your money and control everything about you unless you somehow find a way to break through and you're one of the few billionaires in the world.
So, thank you. Thank you very much. I think this has been most helpful, and I really appreciate our panel. Before we leave, I have a couple of announcements. One is we were handing out a little flyer called the World's Fair of Liberty. Join us at Freedom Fest. I don't know how many of you know this, but this is my effort to continue the legacy of my Uncle Cleon by creating an annual event. We all live busy lives, but can we once a year come together for 3 or 4 days to learn from each other, to network, to socialize, and to celebrate liberty? That's the idea behind our Freedom Fest, the World's Fair of Liberty. So we have this handout. Please take one with you. Just by show of hands, how many have not received this flyer? Okay, so Paul, if you can go out and get those and pass those around to people who did not get it. As you're leaving, please get a copy of this. We have our book out here. My wife and I will be over to autograph the book. It makes a wonderful gift. It's a wonderful read. It's a wonderful look about a patriot who really has made a difference in this world. So I hope you'll pick up a copy. We'll go through as quickly as we can. It's relatively inexpensive, just $20 with a credit card or cash.
Not credit card, Venmo or cash.
Right. Okay. What? Well, just a minute. So I wanted to give you my 2 amendment recommendations because I believe in reading Section 8, Article 1 of the Constitution. You can drive a truck through it. The ability to tax, the ability to trade, regulations, to print money, all of that without much in terms of limitation there. There's only a Section 9 that starts limiting government, and 9 and 10, you really need to read very carefully. So I would like to see a balanced budget amendment, and I'd like to see a tax limitation amendment. Those are two amendments that have been favored over the years. I read this book about Orrin Hatch, Senator Orrin Hatch from Utah, who holds the record for having introduced more legislation than any other senator after World War II. Did you know that? Senator Orrin Hatch. And guess who was number 2? Ted Kennedy. Okay, Orrin Hatch and Ted Kennedy, they worked together on a lot of legislation, which you don't see very much at all anymore today. But he told me, Orrin Hatch said, the one amendment I could never get through was the balanced budget amendment. And so as a result, look where we're headed. $38 trillion debt and growing every year. No matter who is Republican or Democrat, it just seems to grow and grow and grow. And believe me, I can tell you this as a financial economist, you cannot live beyond your means forever. At some point, you create a crisis, what Ludwig von Mises said, a crack-up boom that causes a bust, a boom-bust cycle. And it's something that we need to start worrying about. I think that's one reason Bitcoin has become so successful, and gold doubling in the last 2 years. So there are ways to protect ourselves, but it's very destructive for the average person. And so we need to do what is necessary, I think, to make changes. And we have that ability. It is in ourselves to make those changes. And I thank you all for coming and being part of this event. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Shane.
Thank you. Hey, can we give a round of applause for our panelists who were wonderful? Thank you, Congressman Biggs, Earl Taylor, Mark and Joanne. And can we give a round of applause for Mark and Joanne being here, coming here from California and being such an inspiration to us all. We really appreciate you being here. What a wonderful event. So listen, if I could ask a favor of you, they're going to come over here. I know they're going to sign books, and I know they're going to allow for photographs. So if you are planning to have a photograph taken, if you have your phone out ready to go, Don, are you going to help with this? For some reason it comes to mind that you're helping move the crowd, because you're so good at that, right? But, so who knows? So we'll get some folks over here to help move this, but I would ask you that as we finish, that you allow them to get over to the table, because I know a lot of you are going to want to talk to them right here. Please don't do that. Please allow them to get over to the table, and you'll have an opportunity to say hello once they get over. But listen, this has been a wonderful night. I think it's 40 some odd years in the making as I sat in that bedroom in Mesa, Arizona, reading Cleon skousen. As I mentioned when we got started, never would I believe that all these years later, to be able to come in and listen to the nephew of Cleon along with Mark's wife, to listen to their story. And I'm just ecstatic to read this book that they've compiled, and to learn more about America's divine destiny, and to learn about the role that we all play. And I hope that's what you leave with. Inspired to play a significant role in preserving the principles of freedom, and reining big government back in, and promoting more liberty for us and the next generation. So thank you all so much for being here tonight, and it's great to have you here, and we'll get started with the book signing.